Hi, I'm George Rogers with ChoiceSkills. Thank you for participating in our little micro poll. As you realize, I'm certain the answers are not mutually exclusive, but our purpose here is trying to help us focus for a few minutes on what our priorities really are, what we really want for our children, and how well our educational priorities match our educational practices. Think about it this way. Every day in our classrooms as parents, as teachers, and in our homes as parents, we're feeding our children ideas. And they get all kinds of ideas from us on a daily basis, plus the fact they've got dozens of other sources feeding them information and ideas faster than we can give them to them. And so they have all these ideas to choose from. And now what's the basis for their making their choices? Well, we all know that the universal desire that all of us have is to be happy, right? That's the universal desire. And most of our decisions are driven by that objective. Whether we're 2 years old or whether we're 20 or 80 or whatever we're at in our process, that's our driving motivation. So think of it this way. Choices are driven by ideas. And obviously, we all have different ideas about what's going to make us happy. And it's pretty apparent from any real observation in the world around us that a great many of those ideas aren't working all that well. So what can we do? Well, let's come back to basics. First of all, if ideas are the most powerful things in the world, then the most empowering thing in the world is to be able to distinguish a good idea from a bad idea, right? Well, let me ask you a question. Where in our educational system are we teaching it? Where were you taught it as a child? Where are our children being taught it now? They're getting ideas coming at them from all sorts of directions, but they don't have the tools to make those choices. Now, when I was a teenager, I made a lot of bad choices. But fortunately, I had a much more limited range of ideas, of choices I could make than kids have these days. And so while I got into trouble, I avoided a lot of the troubles that many kids are having today. And so we have to be clear on ourselves that we're living in a different world. This is a world which our children are growing up in that is rapidly changing, and it's becoming increasingly complex and confusing and even increasingly dangerous, right? So our whole point here is that we need to be giving our children some better tools with which to make the choices that are going to affect their lives both now and in the future. And that's the whole purpose of ChoiceSkills. And so I'd like to invite you to stay with us. On the right-hand side of this video is a 4-part video series that you can sign up for free on character-based learning. And now I'd like to just spend the remaining moments in this video putting a stake in the ground, if you will. A stake in the ground that says this is what our educational priorities ought to be. And if they're not this, then maybe we want to consider making these priorities our driving goal in education. And I pretty well can promise you that with the concept of character-based learning tied to these particular goals, that's a doable concept. So I'm going to turn this over now to two very important men to help us define what our educational priorities can and ought to be. Theodore Roosevelt and Benjamin Franklin.
Theodore Roosevelt put it succinctly when he said, "To educate a person in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society." But Benjamin Franklin got to the heart of the matter when he wrote, "There is no happiness but in a virtuous and self-approving conduct." And to put this in context of our efforts to educate children, he had this to say, "It is certainly of more consequence to a man that he has learnt to govern his passions in spite of temptation, to be just in his dealings, to be temperate in his pleasures, to support himself with fortitude under misfortune, and to behave with prudence in all his affairs and every circumstance of life. I say, it is of much more real advantage to him to be thus qualified than to be master of all the arts and sciences in the world besides. The absence of this dimension of learning as a priority in education is the missing piece in education, and it can only be rectified by character-based learning. To learn more about the missing piece in education, I invite you to sign up for our 4-part video series. It's free in the box on the upper right-hand corner of this page. To learn more about character-based learning, just click on the link at the top of this page.